The impeachment hysteria begins. Adam Shifty Schiff, Trump may face the real prospect of jail time. Nadler floating impeachment. By the way, all the things that I told you was on their agenda item list if you elected them in the House and the Senate. It won't ever go anywhere. It's never going to happen. This collusion never existed here. The most damning thing that we learned this weekend really has to do with James Comey admitting that they never verified Clinton's bought and paid for Russian dossier that actually was used to influence the election. Carl Bernstein has just been a Trump hater from day one. He's cornered. He's just absolutely cornered. The walls are closing in, Senator Blumenthal saying, on Donald Trump. And it goes on from there. By the way, and if Trump weren't president, he'd be serious jeopardy of being charged. James Comey, who himself could end up being charged if we have equal justice under the law. Former Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich. You always have the great historical professorial take on everything. You're a natural professor. You're watching what I'm watching, hearing what I'm hearing. What's your reaction?
Well, look, I've been thinking about this all day. I believe the challenge we should give to Mueller is simple. Release all 70 hours of Cohen's interviews. Mm-hmm. None of them involve national security. There's nothing to be redacted. They had this guy for 70 hours.
Well, now, what they're talking about impeachment on, because some people may just be joining us, is on, quote, a campaign finance issue. But Michael Cohen has admitted that he lied under oath, admitted he's been on both sides of this issue, but the media tends, and the left, they want to believe the version that suits their political purposes.
Well, look, this is very standard. Anybody who's read great mystery or great novels about defense attorneys have seen this over and over again. You have the prosecutor leaking out and releasing their version of reality based on their selecting out the things they want to release. That's why I think the first test is to say, release all 70 hours. Let's see in context what Cohen said. Let's see how often he changed his story. Why are we supposed to believe the latest story when apparently they didn't believe the earlier stories? They didn't keep him for 70 hours for nothing. They were trying to work him around to get him to the story they wanted. And I think that the American people deserve to see this entire process by which a group of prosecutors who clearly have the goal of destroying the president. This has nothing to do, you'll notice, nothing that they've talked to Cohen about has anything to do in a serious way with the Russians. Nothing that they're threatening the president with has anything to do with the Russians. This whole thing is a fishing expedition to find an excuse to destroy the person who the American people elected to be president.
It's
that's what it is.
And the greatest evidence of all of this is if it's sort of like when the Justice Kavanaugh hearings were coming on and everybody was saying, I believe. But at the same time, Keith Ellison was being accused not from actions 36 years ago, but within the last year of repeated emotional and physical abuse. And he's the second in charge of the DNC. Not a peep from those same people. So they didn't care about the issue or the charge of Michael Avenatti. They didn't dispose of due process and the presumption of innocence. It's not the issue. What they really care about here, it's not, we have evidence of real Russia interference. We have Uranium One and all of the corruption involved where we had a FBI spy reporting back to our top law enforcement agency bribery, extortion, money laundering, kickbacks by a Putin entity within the United States that wanted to get a foothold in our uranium market. They got it and then kicked back 145 million people involved to the Clinton Foundation. Or the dirty dossier, which I think is the biggest story from the weekend, and that's James Comey admitting that they never verified the dossier, which the Nunes-Grassley-Graham memos tell us was the bulk of the application, original and 3 subsequent applications, but they signed it anyway. And they never told the FISA judges that Hillary paid for it. Now, to me, that is a huge story, but nobody cares.
And by the way, apparently Comey said in the same hearing that when he left the FBI, he had seen no evidence of collusion between Trump and the Russians.
We still don't have any evidence. That's the irony here. But we do have evidence of a Russian dossier that was paid for by another candidate, that was disseminated to the American people to convince them not to vote for Donald Trump and influence the election with Russian lies. That we do know that, right? That's provable. So where does this, look, to me, this is, I think, a strategy now where these five forces that I have been discussing for a long time, and that would be the deep state. Now I think most people understand what that means. Democrats, the media, never Trumpers who can't acknowledge that this guy has governed conservatively and successfully, and then weak Republicans. And I think that it's now converging into a feeding frenzy in the hopes that they can, through 1,000 cuts, either remove him from office or render him unelectable in 2020.
Well, sure. I mean, look, this whole effort is I want to go back. This is an effort to destroy President Trump. This is not an effort to get at the truth. It's not an effort to enforce the rule of law. And your point's exactly right. I mean, if Bill Clinton can get $500,000 from a Russian bank, why isn't that questionable? If the Clinton Foundation can get millions and millions of dollars from Russians, why isn't that a question? If Hillary can destroy 33,000 emails, why isn't that a question? And, of course, none of them are, because this is a purely left-wing bureaucratic effort to protect the establishment and to protect the old order, and their method of doing it is to try to destroy the president, and has nothing to do with the rule of law. And I do want to go back to what I said at the very beginning. A very simple test for Mueller is release the entire transcript of all 70 hours of interviews and let the country judge Cohen. But let us see all the different ways he lied. Let us see all the different ways that the prosecutors tried to lead him and coach him and talk him into where he now is. And I don't think they can release that stuff. I don't think they can allow the country to see just how hard they pressured this guy and just how they maneuvered him and manipulated him to get the agreements they got.
I mean, it was pretty interesting, and I guess they're going to want to indict Roger Stone and James Corsi next, Jerome Corsi, rather. And I had both of them on the show, and Jerome Corsi had spent some 40 hours with Mueller, and it was made very clear to him that he would get a plea deal and no jail time at all. He's 72 years old. If he would just tell them the story that they wanted to hear. And he said, it's against my faith, my religion. I can't lie to God. I can't lie in a legal document. You're asking me to do something and say something that's not true. So rather than just sign his name to it, which would have made his life a hell of a lot easier, at 72, he's risking potentially, like Paul Manafort, dying in jail.
But see, you're making my case for why we should demand all these things be released. I think we would find that the prosecutors were using the power of the law to coerce and blackmail and intimidate, and that it was a totally one-sided and totally vicious effort whose only goal was to destroy Trump. It had nothing to do with getting at the truth, and it had nothing to do with enforcing the rule of law.
Historically speaking, and you are a great historian, I know you're known for being an author, writer, politician, etc., but your love is history. Can you think of anything that has happened in American history that is comparable to this? Because I can't. I can't
think of any occasion where the full power of the state, that's what Mueller represents. Mueller represents the ability to put you in jail, the ability to bankrupt you. I have no doubt that whatever deal he got with the general was in fact gotten by threatening first to bankrupt his family, and
he had to sell his house, and then threatening his son because his son worked with him.
And that's the kind of stuff that I think we should insist be put on the record. These people have been doing things. I mean, we have cases like this, as you know. Sidney Powell wrote a terrific book called License to Lie, which is about prosecutorial behavior in the Justice Department, how they destroyed Arthur Anderson and then were repudiated 9-0 by the Supreme Court, how they destroyed a U.S. senator in Alaska and then turned out to be totally false. So we've had cases, but to see the entire power of the state go to work to destroy an incumbent president of the United States is astonishing. And I don't know of anything comparable in American history. And I think that we need to recognize we're watching literally an effort to create a judicial coup d'etat in which they will drive from office the President of the United States because they so deeply dislike him.
Do you think it has chances of being successful?
Not much. I mean, as long as, I mean, I think
not
as long
much.
as...
That's not a... I don't know if that's the answer I wanted, but go ahead.
Well, no, look, you never have a 100% guarantee because you never know, you know, how the dynamic is going to work out. But it strikes me that this is like a jury trial in which all we're getting so far is the prosecutor. And we haven't seen the defense yet. We haven't seen the witnesses. We haven't seen the alternatives. And I don't think this is going to play out the way Mueller wants it to play out. I think, if anything, as people learn more and more about it, they're going to be more and more offended. And you got to ask yourself about yourself or your neighbors or anybody you've ever seen. If you were 70 hours with federal prosecutors badgering you, threatening you, blackmailing you, you know, what would you be willing to say? And I think a lot of what happened with Cohen was just pure intimidation.
I think this happens to a lot of people. I mean, you know, I think Papadopoulos regrets what he did. I think, as does, you know, Lieutenant General Flynn. If somebody says, well, you better sign this, even though Comey didn't think you lied, McCabe didn't think you lied, Strzok didn't think you lied, nobody in the FBI thought you lied, but this is going to be our plea agreement. You're going to admit that you lied, or we're going to have to dig deep into your son's finances next, and that might mean, you know, years in prison for him. And I'm thinking, well, what father isn't going to just dive on the sword and take the hit? And that's what I believe happened.
Right. And see, the reason I really do believe, more than any case I can remember, that we should be demanding all these transcripts is we ought to see which lawyer threatened to go after his son. Which lawyer threatened to bankrupt him? I mean, you go down these case by case. These guys are playing with the entire power of the U.S. government to intimidate and destroy people. And that's a very frightening thing for the country's future.
Well, I think it is, too. All right, quick break. We'll come back more with Newt Gingrich on the other side. And as we continue with former Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich. You know, one of the things I'm looking at, it's amazing how the Democrats hid their agenda the whole election season. Now, it didn't work out that well. Remember, Clinton lost 8 Senate seats and 52 House seats. So it was a net loss of 60. You had Obama lose 6 Senate seats and 63 House seats, and the net loss in that case. You know, the president goes in and helps save the Georgia governor's race, the Tennessee Senate race, the Florida gubernatorial and the Senate race there. He goes in and helps Josh Hawley defeat Claire McCaskill. He helps defeat Joe Donnelly in Indiana, helps defeat Heidi Heitkamp in North Dakota, and has, I think, a net of 37 House losses, but all these Senate seats he picks up, keeps control of the Senate, which I guess now, in light of their real agenda, it was a pretty darn good fight for him, and a crucial one, because a lot of what they may want to do is going to be stopped right there dead in its tracks in the U.S. Senate, right?
That's exactly right. I mean, I don't believe in the end that they're going to be able to first, I don't think they'll be able to impeach him. I think they can talk about it. They can have hearings. I have every reason to believe that at some point after Mueller finishes his report, he'll come up and have a series of loving hearings in which the Democrats all tell him what a heroic, remarkable, patriotic figure he is. But in the end, I think they probably won't even pass impeachment in the House, and they certainly have no hope of passing it, of actually convicting in the Senate.
Oh, that gives us a lot of hope. All right, we'll pick this up tonight. Newt Gingrich